Council and Planning Commission to order. It's 11:03 a.m. Tuesday, September 19th. We're meeting here in the City Center Conference Room. This meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube, Provo City Council, where it will also be available for on-demand viewing. Please be aware that the microphones in the room pick up the noise of paper and other rustling objects. Further, be aware that the microphones can pick up side conversations. So we'd like to begin with the roll call. Mr. Jones, if we could begin with you.
Brian Jones.
Bill Pepperoni.
Dave Anderson.
George Stewart.
Deborah Jensen. Elizabeth Vanderlicken.
Dave Sewell.
David Harding.
Shannon Ellsworth. Kim Santiago.
Gary McKinney.
Wayne Parker.
Chris Strackett.
All right, thank you. Let's see. Do we have nothing for this week?
We don't at all. Yeah, no.
Okay.
Our Father in heaven, we are grateful this day that we can come and discuss matters of city business for the city of Provo and its residents. We're grateful for the council and the planning commission and the mayor and all the public servants who serve in various roles and capacities, and the hard work that they do and the thoughtful deliberations that they make in the furtherance of the growth and development of this great city. We pray as we discuss these things, Father, that thy Spirit will attend to us, that we may be able to have clear discourse and good meeting of minds, that we'll be able to find ways to do our work better and to serve the residents better. In the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you. For the last couple of years, the council has adopted a practice of meeting regularly with some of our city boards. We've really felt that that's been valuable to know people are serving better and discuss ways that we can work together better. And I feel like we have kind of a special relationship with the Planning Commission, both in city code and just based on the volume of items that come to us that come through you first. I think just about every meeting that we have several land use items on the agenda that you issued recommendations on. I feel like we pay close attention to your recommendations. I don't know how you feel about that, but however, we have different statutory responsibilities. You look at the items from a little bit different perspective. We're elected officials and are accountable to the residents, so it's an interesting process that we have. Anyway, really looking forward to having this discussion with you today. First item on the agenda is some recent changes to the process of moving items through the Planning Commission to the Council. I think you had a brief discussion about this when we sent it through the Planning Commission, but I'm not sure that it was covered in much detail, so I thought it'd be good to make sure everyone understood how the new process is supposed to work, get your comments and feedback on it, and that sort of thing. So do we have that document ready to pull up on the screen? Thank you. So I thought I'd start by just quickly reviewing the process that we've had up to date, and then how the new process is different. So on the top line of that chart there, where it says current, that is current as of up until, I guess, this meeting here is the first meeting that we've had something to flow through with the new process. So originally, and I would come to you, we would wait for your report, and then our council staff would do our own noticing for when that item would come to the Planning Commission. And we were operating under the assumption that we were required to provide at least 14-day notice of that. And we found out not too recently that that actually isn't the requirement in state code, and so we wanted to make an adjustment there. But we considered that we could move items through more quickly without any loss or without reducing the amount of time or the amount of notice that was given to residents if we moved to simultaneously noticing items that are going to appear on the planning commission. So in other words, when the community development sends out the notice of when an item's going to appear on your agenda, they are now at the same time giving notice of when it will appear on the council agenda. That makes sense? So today is the first time that we've had, I think we have 3 items that were noticed that way, simultaneously noticed. So 3 of the items that you considered last Wednesday, 6 days ago, are on our agenda today because of that new process. Whereas before, it would have been at least 3 weeks until it came to work meeting, and then typically we would have waited 2 weeks until we brought it from a work meeting to a council meeting. So with this new process, now there's 2 scenarios. So we're actually trying to accomplish 2 goals with this new process. One is to streamline and move things through more quickly. The other is actually to strengthen public engagement. We hear citizens sometimes complain because they feel like when they come to the council meeting, there's been so much work that's gone on before that they almost feel like the decision is made sometimes by the time they get there. So we wanted especially for controversial or non-routine items, to give them a chance to have 2 public meetings where they can comment. So scenario number 1 in the new system is that middle row where it's not a routine item. And the way we define that is if any council member feels like we need more discussion, then it's not a routine item. And so then there would be 2 hearings. And so in that scenario, we put a work meeting and a council meeting that night, and then there would be a second public meeting that we'd vote on 2 weeks later. So even in that scenario, the item moves through 2 weeks faster than the current system. And then the other scenario is where at least one council member feels like more discussion I got that backwards. The other scenario is when all the council members don't feel like there's any more discussion. This would typically be a situation where there's, staff is recommending it, probably a unanimous recommendation of the planning commission, not any real concerns expressed by residents, that kind of thing. And so in that case, we would have the option of voting on it that night, 6 days after you first considered it. So that's kind of a brief overview. Do you have any questions, concerns, thoughts about the process?
Great move, I think. The additional time, I assume, hasn't really served much of a purpose or has any value in the process. So I've heard a few complaints about the process just taking a long time to get through, so it seems to help address that. So,
Are there other cities that have done the same thing? That are doing simultaneous noticing?
Are you aware of? I think we used to do it in Provo a long time.
Yeah, the only city I know who used to do it is Provo. We did it at one time and then went away from it, and the council did their own noticing, and they had a land use committee, and the timeframes could really undefined and unpredictable. So I think this is actually getting back to what people traditionally have been used to.
I would agree that shortening the time frame between the planning commission hearing the public is available for comment, and then doing council meeting 6 days later really does help keep perception that public input is wanted and it's not a done deal necessarily. And that's public engagement.
Other comments or questions?
The one thing we haven't run into yet, which I imagine we will, is a situation where we've noticed for planning commission and council, and then at planning commission we end up having a continuance and things like that.
I think we have run into it already.
Have we already?
Yes.
Oh yeah, last month, that's right.
So
There were, I believe, a couple items on both
Yeah,
agendas that
that's
were
right.
published for working council today that had items that I wanted to talk about.
I think the downside of that is outweighed though by the benefit of assuming that happens. Hopefully on the rare side.
So the way that will appear on our agenda then is it'll just show in advance that it's been continued. So anybody that's looking at it will know. There were a couple other nuances. Mr. Jones might need to help me remember these, but I believe that one of those was that in order for us to vote on that first evening, in other words, in order to deem the item as a routine item, vote on that first night, we need to have the planning commission report at least by Thursday morning. And the intent of that was just so council members would have sufficient time, a lot of us rely heavily on the weekend to look at those materials before. Who's your chair this year?
Jamin?
So does that fall to the chair to get that report ready? I'm not sure how that works.
We do the report. Yeah. We'll get the report ready and the essential action that they make is the recommendation and the motion. And then we'll put in some, hopefully a meaningful summary of some of the discussion around the ultimate action that the planning commission took. But we'll have that and we can get that into the next day. Then we may occasionally run into a particularly difficult meeting or something like that that's very complicated, but we haven't had that happen yet either.
And I think the thinking on that was if it was that difficult of an item that it would take the extra time, it's probably not one of those items we want to consider routine.
Yeah, and so we're not that concerned about it. And frankly, if it is going to be something like that, we may end up in the meeting recommend to the planning commission to continue it anyways, and then come back at the next meeting with a refined draft. It's often difficult unless it's a minor, say on an ordinance amendment, it's a minor fix to the proposed amendment. Often it's just better to bring it back at the next meeting to really go through it if it's a fairly lengthy or might be a complicated fix.
There was one other requirement, this one I probably need your help on, Mr. Jones, is we occasionally had a situation where the planning commission made a recommendation on an ordinance and the council attorney has not had an opportunity to review it yet, and then sometimes changes were made, and then what we were voting on may have been slightly different. And so I think we included something that we wanted to.
Yeah, so part of the new policy is that community development and the attorney's office are going to coordinate so that those items come over for review before they even go to planning commission, so that if I have recommended changes, that those are already included in what the planning commission sees. So we're getting that worked out. So.
And I think the intent there would be if we did discover something that you needed to recommend changes on it after that, then that would also be another criteria that would flag it as non-routine. I think it would be decided that person. Is that correct? Mr. Hardy?
Another aspect that I really like is that the noticing before a planning commission meeting is a little bit more robust, as the postcard to affect nearby property owners and things like that that isn't included in the council noticing. And so you can imagine someone who doesn't read the public notices in the Herald, or who doesn't follow the council on social media or something, may miss that meeting 6 weeks later, So having that postcard with that date, it gives them, I think, a better opportunity to know when they can make that.
Yeah, that's something I appreciate about it as well. We're kind of taking advantage of community development's more thorough procedures to reach more residents than we were before. So awesome. Welcome, Mr. Kinnick. Is there any other discussion on this item? All right, it looks like we've got plenty of time for anything you would like to talk about.
There's one item that was received after the agenda.
Oh, after we did, let's see.
That was in that additional questions and discussions.
I will submit from the planning commission purpose of the zoning committee, how the planning commission interacts with them, whether there's overlap and what projects they're working on, et cetera. Oh, that's great. Have you seen this?
I haven't, but I'd be happy to address it. So the zoning committee was formed when, well, I guess I'll back up. One of the main priorities of the council and one of the main priorities of our constituents that we found since we've been on the council is getting our zoning, getting people compliant with the zoning laws. We have areas that are overoccupied, and we've had several neighborhoods come to us asking us, can you fix this parking problems? We can't get our city services, we can't get our mail, we can't get our garbage picked up, we can't get our streets plowed, we can't park, people can't visit us because the parking's so bad. Can you get these, units under control so that these symptoms go away, right, of overoccupancy? So that became our number one priority, or one of our main priorities. And we talked to the administration about it. They put together a good neighbor, kind of a committee, and they came with recommendations to the council of things that might be helpful policy-wise in helping them enforce on these homes that are out of compliance. And so in response to that, the council assigned 3 council members, myself, Mr. Stewart, and Mr. Connect, to be the zoning committee, council zoning committee. And we also have Mr. Jones. We have Carrie Walls on that committee, who's over zoning for the city. And then we have Marcus Draper, who's an attorney, and his specific job is this, to help manage some of the zoning issues and getting people into compliance. We found that when they get letters from legals, people react quicker and are more compliant. And so the hope is we get them compliant quickly, and then we keep them compliant after that. So that's why the council committee was formed, to help bring all of these ideas and put them into a strategic plan. So we engaged neighborhoods and people who have been in the trenches for years, kind of grassroots people who have been very, good in their neighborhoods to try and help the city get this under control. We invited them, I can't remember, 20 of them, I can't remember a lot. But we had them give input on what they felt would be helpful, not helpful. And we got this all together, got public input, and then we put together a strategic plan and brought it to the council. The council adopted that plan. And now we're just working towards getting some of those items into play so that Carrie and her team have every tool that they need to be able to get things under control. And why do we do this? For quality of life. There are lots of reasons. Economic reasons as well. When these places are overoccupied, we found that the housing market is really difficult. It's difficult to find a place to rent, and it's difficult to buy a place for a reasonable amount because the rents are going up, the price of the housing is going up, but the quality of the housing is actually not improving, and that's a big problem. We're getting more blight and more expensive homes, and yet they're not cared for, and too expensive for a family or 3 batching singles to purchase, but it's not too expensive for an investor who plans to over-occupy. And that's this kind of vicious cycle we've gotten into in some areas in our city, and we're trying to get that under control. Did you have something to add?
Well, Ms. Sondier, you mentioned the strategic plan. I was just wondering maybe if it would be useful to pull that up on the screen if we could find it. It just occurred to me, I wonder if the planning commission is familiar with that document.
So primarily it's an enforcement effort, not necessarily to study potential changes to zoning and that type of a thing, but more just to bring things into alignment with
Zoning
existing.
compliance.
It's zoning compliance. It's to give the administration all of the tools that they feel like they need in order to get it under control. I think that was initially, in a nutshell, what we're trying to accomplish. Are there things policy-wise that we can do? Can we strengthen our ordinance to give them the tools necessary to get these under control? And the one that we're working on currently is having each adult in a household or a unit sign a contract with the landlord, because what they were finding, zoning officers were going out, they were finding that there were more individuals living in a home than they should be there. And they said, they talked to the landlord and said, hey, you have 6 individuals living in this house. He's, no, I only have one contract with one person.
Yeah.
So this helps identify for the landlord and the city how many adults are living in the home, whether it's a home for a family, or supposed to have just what our family definition, the state definition is 3 people to unrelated people to a home or unit. So it just helps us identify how many adults are living there. Everybody's under the same understanding. All the adults living in the home understand what the zoning law is, because many of them don't. Many of the renters don't know that they can't have 6 people. There are 6 beds. Why can't we have 6 people in this house? And so it's just helping everybody get on the same page of understanding what the laws are, and then being able to hold them accountable to those laws. That's what we're currently working on right now.
So as was mentioned, I think this committee is focused on how can we help the city generally, residents of the city generally become, if I haven't think of anything, there's another word for that, but basically compliant with what the zoning laws are. We also have a housing committee, which we haven't heard from in a little bit, but we have a housing committee that is looking more at it from the perspective of what is the demand, what is our housing stock that we have, what are some perhaps changes to perhaps zoning, or changes to apartment size, or changes to how areas are zoned. Do we need to change the zoning designation for different areas so that we can better meet the demand that is there? So just because it's not really the focus of the zoning compliance committee or zoning committee, we do have.
So speaking of the housing committee, we met this last week, brought the current recommendation from the zoning committee to this new ordinance requiring contracts to the housing committee, and asked those on the committee, which represent a diverse group of people in the business of housing, whether it be on the neighborhood level or nonprofits. We have a realtor on the committee also, and they agreed that what is being recommended by the Utah Apartment Association as best practice, industry practice, not just for Provo or a certain part of Provo, but for everywhere, is that you have contracts. And so the housing committee agreed with that recommendation, that this, and it was unanimous, that this is needed. It is best practice. And so that just gives you a little more perspective.
One of the main focuses of the housing committee was affordable housing. That's kind of how it started. We had concerns that we were congregating all of our affordable housing in one area in the downtown, and we know that that's not best practice. It's not, for anyone, for those occupying the housing, for cities in general, it's not a good idea to congregate all of your low-income housing in one area. And we had multiple, large apartment complexes going up in the downtown that were between 60 and 100% low income where typically you'd like to see 80% market rate and maybe 10 or 20% low income and have it spread out. And so that was one of the issues that the Housing Committee was brought together to try to address. We brought all these different entities throughout the city, the school board and Habitat for Humanity, the downtown, some clergy. We brought in just different, the Provo Housing Authority. I'm missing lots of people, but we brought in different entities that Karen, the panelist from the food bank, and tried to address this. How do we best serve people who are low income? How do we provide affordable housing in Provo, yet do it in a way that makes sense, that's best practice? And so when trying to decide what does a healthy and balanced neighborhood look like, that's been the focus of the housing group. So they kind of complement each other, but the zoning committee was really just formed to take a look at the recommendations that have been given by the administration and what tools they feel like they needed, and how do we bring this forward as a council in sort of an organized fashion so that we can start working on some of these things and giving the administration the tools that they need and engaging the right community partners in helping us move these forward and being successful in trying to improve the quality of life for citizens here. So.
And concurrently and separately, but after a 2-year process in March, we finally approved the Southeast area plan for the neighborhoods. And part of that called for, well, let me just say that the first time it came before the Planning Commission, which was maybe after a year, somebody in the audience, I can't remember who it was, got up and said, hey, I don't recognize this. This isn't my neighborhood. And it was probably a young single adult who said, you're missing the elephant in the room. There's just so many young singles in this area, and it's not even mentioned in the plan. Okay, so the committee went back, and there was some discussion and a recommendation that because this demographic had been congregating in Southeast Provo, and would likely keep doing so because of the critical mass that is already established and the board and state structures and everything, that perhaps providing some housing that was designed for them, that had sufficient parking and other amenities, would be appropriate. So that's why recently we asked for part of Southeast Provo to be rezoned for the matching singles overlay type of housing, which hopefully we get more input tomorrow in our open house, but we want to hear from the single young adults what kind of zone it should be. I mean, some have recommended a matching singles 4, matching singles 5, matching singles 6, so it's not just one zone that allows for 4 to 6 or 3 to 6 or whatever. So it's important that the neighborhood plan recognizes there's an issue and that we are trying to provide housing for a demographic that has unique needs. And there's even recently been some discussion of would there be parcels on the east side of State Street that would be suitable for the matching singles overlay, rather than saying that they all have to be on the west side, which happen to be available. So we need to keep an open mind on where it would be appropriate, but I think building something that would suit the needs of this demographic is, well, it's in the plan, and I think it has merit, and we're pursuing it. We're going to try to write the matching singles overlay zone in a way that makes sense. And anyway, that's just part of what's going on.
So one of the interesting aspects of this question for me is whether there's overlap. I think that's, so the zoning committee, I guess, is focused more on enforcement, so that's maybe not as much overlap, but the housing committee is probably looking at some things that kind of fall into your purview as well. So I don't know, any thoughts on should we be collaborating more closely or working together more closely on these planning commission? I mean, on these strategic sort of zoning issues, and if so, what would that look like? Any thoughts?
Work session fodder is my thought. You know, maybe on some kind of schedule if things are progressing with them. Particular committee and dealing with issues that might impact the city's land use plans, that sort of a thing. A couple times a year or something like that, just sort of a check-in. Just trying to make sure everybody's generally on the same page.
So maybe we at least should be giving you the agendas of the housing committee, so you know what we're talking about. And for that matter, if someone wanted to come and listen, I mean, you're welcome. Recently on the west side, we had a couple of proposals to do an A overlay, which failed, at least at the council level. And so that gave me pause for thought, and I thought it was time to look at our A overlay in a more holistic point of view, because when it was originally instituted, it wasn't done with a theoretical, oh, wouldn't it be interesting if we brought this type of use to Provo? No, this use was already in Provo, and it was done in a reflective manner, like, well, let's see, how do we kind of memorialize what's going on here? But if you look at the A overlay from a larger and a higher viewpoint, we can perhaps evaluate it on a different level and recommend some changes that might be more in keeping with what other cities do and what outcomes we like, and address any issues that seem to be negative issues. So it's always been my interest personally that developers would come forward with a significant portion of a new development that would have a overlay built into it, which I think would then provide a unique housing type. That's where I got started when I got married into the major neighborhood in a accessory arrangement, and stayed there for 12 years. Of course, we had to leave because, 3 kids, 2 bedrooms, finally you're out. But that's one of the things we want to address is what should be the relationship between the main unit and the accessory. Gary McGinn tells us that our minimum house size in Provo is 1,200 square feet. Is that correct, Bill?
In the R10 zone, depends on the zone, but.
Okay. And so if you have a minimum of 1,200 square feet, would you ever want to chop a house into less than 1,200 square feet on the main floor by creating the accessory? So things like that would help.
Speaking of accessory dwelling units, it seems like we mostly hear about, or the A overlay, excuse me, we mostly hear about that in the context of somebody wanting to add one. But we're hearing from one neighborhood that we may be getting requests to actually remove one from there. So I thought that was it. So I think that North Park is talking about that right now. So you may be seeing that.
I'm curious, I saw some smiles, I'm curious what the smiles were about.
It's unusual, at least in my experience, to hear that someone wants to remove the accessory dwelling. But, typically neighborhoods are in favor of it. It helps people age in place. It helps people at either end of whether they're early forming households or they're retirees and they need income from a level property.
So we've provided for that with an over 65. Are you aware of that?
I guess just a quick follow-up. I was curious if anyone has, memories of the last time, at least that I was aware of, that there was a serious proposal to remove the overlay. If anyone still has those battle scars.
Yeah, I do. It was your neighborhood.
Yeah, it was my neighborhood. It got pretty contentious. So I was a little wary when I heard the neighborhood chair of North Park that he's interested in exploring it. But I gave him some advice on if this is something that the neighbors generally want. Here's perhaps how to navigate that. So
it'll be interesting, but it does have a different feel than, what, 8, 9 years ago when it was proposed in my neighborhood. So it'll be interesting. And I agree, and there are some really good aspects of a overlay. I'm sorry, the accessory dwelling units. But you can look in my neighborhood, you can look in North Park, you can look at some of the adjacent neighborhoods, and I would say that overall it has had a pretty significant negative impact on the neighborhoods. Get into why, but what's, in my opinion, interesting is that a lot of that has to do with lack of any enforcement, and so we're not getting the benefits of the accessory dwelling units, but we're getting all of the negatives. People that are creating it without building permits. Things have started with proper permission and doing it the right way, but then after it's sold once or twice or whatever, we have a lot of de facto duplexes, and many of them are, you have a home that's 4-bedroom that used to be able to support a growing family, and as you talked about, or as we talked about, where you can start and rent, and then when you need the extra space, you grow into it, and then as your life experiences or your situation changes, you can move back up and rent out, and there's some great flexibility with accessory dwelling units. But what we've got is a whole bunch of 2-bedroom de facto duplexes that don't have sufficient parking, they don't have any of these things, and we have families that if they start there and then they want to grow into and they want to stay in place. They love the neighborhood, but they cannot find housing that meets their needs, and so they have to move out. So it'll be interesting to see this thing progress.
Have they typically been detached or attached accessory dwelling units?
In my neighborhood, they're single family detached and then converted into an accessory, so it's fully attached.
Like a basement and a main level?
Basement and a main level.
Not a second structure?
No, not a second structure. Yeah.
Speaking of second structures, I've seen in the news lately, I think Pleasant Grove has adopted an ordinance allowing tiny homes as an accessory, and I think Salt Lake's talking about it too. I'm not sure how far we're there, so maybe that's just.
I know of one in my neighborhood that I don't think is exactly permitted use, but is functioning. So if people want to take a look, there's a local example.
So I guess I would ask planning commission members, what do you see your involvement in as far as the zoning committee? Do you feel like there's a contribution you can be making that we're not taking advantage of? With this question, what was your thought?
I'm pleased to know that it's happening, and the explanation, the story behind why and what is being done. I think that, along with the housing committee, anything that you can share with the planning commission is only going to help us make better decisions and understand some of the initiatives that the city is concerned with and that we need to be aware of and educate ourselves about.
I'd echo that. That's my feeling as well.
Maybe we can do a better job of that. We feel like there's a lot of public outreach and not necessarily committee to, council to commission. And we've done this for this reason, and to be able to communicate this knowing better and be able to communicate issues that are important to both of us. And yet, when we were putting the agenda together, that wasn't on the top of my mind to talk about why we put together the zoning committee. So I'm really grateful for that question. And I think that we should have very open discussions about the concerns of the council, the priorities, your concerns, if there are things that we could be doing with our code that would make it easier for you and your decision making, more clarity, or whatever the case might be. I think that in the past couple of years, I've seen an increase of planning staff bringing forward code modifications to make things a little more clear and just a little bit better for the developers, for everybody, so everyone's on the same page. And I appreciated that coming to the council. And I think we've been pretty good to try to wrap our arms around it and see what we can do to improve things and improve the things that make a lot of sense. And so, I don't know, Bill may have a different perspective, but I feel like we've been pretty accommodating to try and make those changes when they come to us.
So speaking of changes, we can, and I think George could attest to this, as we went out campaigning a couple of years ago and people said, hey, we really need some zoning enforcement because the neighborhood that we bought into is just disintegrating, is changing, and it seemed to be because of the lack of enforcement that things were changing. So there's kind of several ways you can change a neighborhood. Some neighborhoods go through a generational change as the kids grow up and move away, and then there's this space when you don't have the kids and people either age in place or move away, but it stays a neighborhood. And part of a healthy and balanced neighborhood is the amount of owner occupancy and stability in that neighborhood. We see that stability reflected in classrooms or in church congregations. Now, if we offer a variety of housing and not just one type in a neighborhood, then it makes it easier to keep cycling people through in their various stages of life and having a healthy when change happens through illegal apartments or occupancy, and that keeps proliferating because there's no enforcement, then the change is not through conscious and a change of the neighborhood saying we want to rezone for an A overlay or we want to create a new zone for this purpose. It's happening without people having any control over it. Those people that bought into the original neighborhood, who invested their dollars and their life into what they thought would be a stable neighborhood that becomes unstable, can be very vocal, very upset. And also I guess some of the ones that are on the other side of the coin are equally vocal and upset. We're going to see some of that tonight. And it's unfortunate. I hope we can stick to the issues because there's a lot of feelings that get generated and sometimes red herring arguments. A lot of times we focus on the externalities, like just the unmowed lawn. But there's also the effect on the school or the church and into the social organism or the community. And so we have to look at it from a holistic point of view if we're going to have a functioning community, not just a collection of buildings that have nameless individuals in them. It's a community.
Mr. Jackson, did I see your hand go up?
No, just acknowledging Andrew Howard, who just arrived.
Andrew Howard?
Nice to be here. Thank you.
I apologize. I need to step out, but I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
So,
Sure.
I have two thoughts rattling around my head. Let me say the first one. In addressing communication, I just want to, I think I said this last time we were together, but we have some new committee, commission members, commissioners. I really appreciate the reports that we get with along with the land use items. Voter rights goes up, is doing a great job. I look at more than just the overall vote. I really appreciate being able to go in and looking at the issues that were brought up, the discussion, the dissenting points of view, the majority view, taking all of that into consideration. And I appreciate that. So keep discussing what you're discussing, I guess. And those reports, just that communication, that is so helpful in evaluating questions that we have to go through.
I agree with that.
we talked a little bit about communication between the two bodies today. And it occurs to me that we have a very high volume of information coming from you to us, but not a lot of information going in that direction. So I was going to suggest for those of you that are interested, could we forward this to the planning commission members just so that we have the strategic plan? I don't know that it'll come into play a lot in what you're doing, but it's, it's all related.
I'd just like to confirm that the meeting at noon on Park.
Sure.
So,
Yes.
in the 90s, when George Bush, he instituted and popular public plan as it seemed, a task force 2000 to review and redo the general plan. And that took 3.5 years. I think it took 6 months to train the 30 individuals on how to be citizen planners before they even went out and held open houses and asked the public, what is your vision for the future? And based on the input from the public, then the value statements were created. And really that was kind of the end of, and the focus of that committee, because the rest of the general plan was pretty much written by staff based on that those guiding values. But, and right now we're in the process, Cliff is working on reconciling and bringing our Vision 2030-50 into correlating that with our general plan. So we really have kind of one vision. And the general plan is one thing. Underneath that, you have your zoning to implement your general plan. The importance of the zoning committee is if you don't have effective and reliable enforcement, then your planning goes for naught. And your zones don't mean anything. And when we would hear people say that they called up and asked where was the best place to get the best return, the least amount of hassle on investment property, and the answer was frankly, just the fact that it's Provo is a problem. I mean, you don't want people flocking to the area to invest because they think they can have an easier time of doing something illegal. And a couple of years ago, we had singles in the Pioneer HOA come and petition us saying, please don't enforce. We were told when we moved here that it was illegal, but that no one enforced, and we don't want you to enforce now, so please don't. And that causes all sorts of grief for the tenants, and so the transparency that's being offered by the requirement of having contracts with the tenants is a benefit for the community, and everyone is on the same page, and hopefully everyone understands better what is legal.
Just make one comment. If you don't have owner occupancy in an area, you must stability. I mean, I've been at this since 1994. And that's the case. It just doesn't work otherwise. And so if you want stability in the churches and the schools, in the neighborhoods, you're going to have a percentage of owner occupancy. And when that all goes away, it's going to happen. I mean, the neighbors in these areas that have been affected are very unhappy, and many are leaving, which is a tragedy in my mind. That they were the stability in the neighborhood, and they're leaving because they can't compete with the investors. They can't compete with money. I hope the planning commission considers that every time they look at a zoning request, because it's just the fact of life. I mean, it's been the case since '94, and it's not going to change.
Do we have any data on these issues?
But if Richard's study, we can give them that.
Yeah, I do have a copy of that I can send. That's talks about a lot of other things too: crime, schools, graduation rates, the graduates that are going to UB or BYU, some of those things too. They're more school, but we do have some data on that. And as far as home occupancy, homeowner occupancy, I think it's 59% statewide is homeowner occupied. In Provo, it's less than 50%.
That's less than 40.
It's less than
It's
40%.
usually about 60% rental in Provo.
So it's kind of yeah. But we do have 4,500 UVU students living. We do know, but they've been what's the word? Their addresses have been marked, and we knew 2 years ago there was exactly 4,500 UVU students living kind of west and south of campus. So we do have a pretty good, and their enrollment since then has gone up over 37,000. So I'm assuming there are many more than just the 4,500 UVU students. So we're housing BYU students, and we're also housing UVU students, and so there's a lot of rental housing going on in Provo for those reasons too. I think they love being in this atmosphere. They love living here.
And those neighborhoods with the BYU and UVU students, are those the ones that are going to heck?
Well, you mentioned that you and George, or you and Mr. Stewart heard a lot about this 2 years ago on the campaign trail. I first learned about it 4 years ago on the campaign trail, because where I live, there aren't really over-occupancy issues per se, at least in my immediate vicinity, but I did find it in many areas of the city that people were complaining about zoning enforcement and ill effects. In some areas, the primary demographic involved in that is students. In other areas, it's young professionals. In other areas, it's neither. It's just investors trying to pack more people in, and so.
I'll read you this MLS listing in my neighborhood, in the Pioneer HOA. In capital letters, cash flow, explanation, investor's dream. Currently rented to 6 single males at $2,300 a month. Non-conforming, meaning they claim it's legal. Built in 2002, this home is fully furnished, 2 kitchens, spacious bedrooms, extra storage space, and lots of parking, a 2-car garage, and on the street. Lease ends at the end of the current semester, and the property will be available for owner occupants May 1st. The is assessed at $260,000 by the county. Asking price is $299,900 or $300,000. And I think they're highlighting the cash flow because that's a selling point, and you do that to jack the price up. Now, we have seen online, as we follow things online, that Christian Faulkner had posted some data that didn't necessarily show the housing prices increasing in Southeast Provo. And I mentioned that to Hannah Peterson, and she says, well, Dave, most of my data is about the rental prices going crazy. And that's, of course, what this property is renting for, is $2,300. I would say that the hopes and dreams or the return of extra dollars does bump up to some degree the sale price, but I think we will see more evidence of homes transitioning from family use at $1,200 in her neighborhood to going into the over $2,000. They do it by person or by bed, and then of course it's more than 3. Yes.
I was just reminded, we're actually scheduled to start working in a couple of minutes, so we could probably get another hour on this season.
I have another one for you, but I'll share that privately.
Yeah, it would be okay if we wrapped up at this point. I do want to just make one last comment, though. I was taken to task the other day that sometimes our council isn't as appreciative of our administrative departments as we should be, and I just want to say that community development is probably the department we interface with the most, and I just really appreciate your efforts, and planning commission, which is closely associated with you, obviously. So much of what we do depends on your work and the research and preparation that you do. I just want to say thank you to all of you. Unless there's any objection, I'd like to declare the meeting adjourned by